November 16th meeting of the DEI committee. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Did you guys get an opportunity to look through the minutes of last meeting? And any issues? Do I have a motion to approve those minutes? I see Katie and a second from Nina. Excellent. So we can move forward. First agenda item is the reports from the subcommittees. We'll go alphabetical. Communications comes first. Communications subcommittee.
I can take that one. We met very, very briefly last week, but we were interrupted by some events at school. So it was not a particularly productive meeting.
All right. Thank you so much. Mike Laster?
I do think, though, that the talking points conversation that we had about giving principals some information that they can share with faculty is a good one. So right now we're poised to use the minutes from our meetings here at the district level to give to principals, in a 5-minute, snippet. How can they update their faculty on what the work is intent, what our work is going on. So Dr. Wiles gave us a little talking points. We reviewed them. And I think at the Leadership Council next meeting, we're going to look at, okay, how can we implement that on a monthly basis to update each school on what the work is, and how we're doing with this work. So I thought that was good.
Amy?
Yeah, just checking back on the minutes. The only other thing that we went over was to update the website with the subcommittee members, because I think they were a little outdated. But like Rebecca said, it was a pretty short meeting. We spent most of the time talking about the talking points, which I think are going to be really critical for consistency around the district.
Anything else from communications? Great. Next would be community engagement.
So I was going to do that one. So we checked in about how it's going with our plan to have somebody from the engagement subcommittee attend the different PTA meetings, PTSA. So a couple of people, volunteered that they had gone to meetings, and Lewis had gone to the Linwood meeting and said that that parents were asking about the blackface incident and what the district was doing about it and stuff. And then Mr. P, Matt Pinchinot, filled us in about some of the stuff the district was doing. And he said there was a lot of training at the superintendent's day. A good part of the day was devoted to that, to DEI training. And he said that the district's been meeting with groups of students, asking them what they need to feel safe, and been looking at its policies to see if anything might be needed, to be changed, and talking to the audit partners about it. And he said that he's done cultural competency training with every high school athlete. This wasn't all directly in response to the incident, but it was stuff that the district is doing lately. And he said something interesting, which was that at the very least, he said, you got to set the bar somewhere. And at the very least, he wants to try to ensure that no student is going to be able to graduate from Guilderland and say, nobody ever told me. I didn't know. I didn't know it wasn't okay to use the N-word. I didn't know it was bad to wear blackface. I didn't know. So that's going to be the absolute minimal goal, is to make sure that nobody leaves here thinking that all that is just fine. When we talked about the possibility of adding something to the code of conduct about, no tolerance for racist acts. And then we had talked earlier about having different members of our large, the subcommittee, the engagement subcommittee, I think it was, being at the Guilderland Library like once a month to meet with, I don't remember if it was the full committee or the subcommittee, but anyway, so to meet with people who might want to stop by the library to talk about anything with the members of the DEI committee. And Mr. P, as usual, doesn't let any moss grow under him, and he's already set up the first one, and it's going to be tomorrow. So it's tomorrow at the Guilderland Library. in the Fuller Room, whatever that is, from 12 to 1. So like I said, anybody from the community at all can stop in there and you will see, I'm not sure who, I think Mr. P will be there and maybe some other people. But anyway, then, yeah, free discussion,
I really like that idea.
12 o'clock.
Anyone
Tomorrow,
else?
12 o'clock, Liz?
Yeah, each time it's going to be like a different time of day, but this first one is noon time. So some other month it'll be like evening or might, I don't know, might be a weekend, or we're trying to reach like everybody, so make it possible for people with different schedules to attend at some point.
I love it. Next time, loop me in to what time, because I'd love to be there.
I wonder too, can communications communicate that to the
Well,
public?
and that's why, like, I'm wondering if I can be present at that. I could be the link to the communications piece of it. So, yeah, that's great.
Please go. I had asked, Mr. Pinchinot must have written the email to our subcommittee from his vacation, but anyway, I had suggested to him that maybe the district could put out one of those email blasts, even like today. I don't know. I don't think that got done, but next time, certainly we can try to see if we can do, an email to the whole community. So people will turn up. I think it's a small room, but I think it's like one of those smallish, but the more, the better.
Let me know the dates.
I see people volunteering to rotate. I think that's a great idea as well.
So if we have the dates ahead of time, if you get them to me, we're doing roughly weekly updates to families on a variety of topics. We could easily put that in there and would be happy to. So let's make that connection so we're able to let people know that he's available, because I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably, just like we have with the DEI meetings, set up these things for the whole rest of the year.
Mhm.
I'm sure we could.
And then have committee members sign up.
Yeah, sounds good.
Elizabeth, is that for like the whole community? Because it might be something to post on our social media, like, hey, this is happening and here, which is
Yes,
pretty,
it's
doesn't
we're
take
sort
much
of-
time to do, right?
We're sort of like modeling it after, Coffee with a Cop or something like that. So I think Mr. P had said he was going to buy like a jug of Dunkin's coffee or something. So there's going to be maybe even coffee, I think. But anyway,
That sounds great. Just getting the word out there so people can come.
Yeah, right.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Oh, there's a hand. Katie?
Elizabeth, I know that your committee was working on finding someone for Altamont. Have you found someone yet for the Altamont meetings?
I don't believe we have.
Okay. I will be at the next meeting as the board liaison, so I can make sure to include any updates as part of my presentation, knowing that. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Are there any other schools that don't have someone yet?
Yeah, there are a lot. We have Guilderland. We have Guilderland High School. We have Guilderland Elementary. We have, what else do we have? Lewis doing Linwood. Tibisai, you were there, weren't you?
FMS. Yeah.
We have FMS done, but we don't have Westmere. Is that right?
What about Pine Bush?
And
We do have Pine Bush.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Okay. So just Westmere, I guess. Is that right?
And
Yeah.
Altamont. Blanca?
And now we have Altamont, so that's good. We had Westmere and Altamont free.
I can do the high school.
Yeah, I was doing the high school, and then there are already several people from the committee who are there anyway. So I think anybody's welcome to go, but I think we have the high school covered. There are a bunch of people from this committee that went there at the last meeting.
Okay, maybe if you could send a list of what we're missing, which schools.
I think we're missing Westmere.
I could do Westmere. I mean, my children don't attend there anymore, but they used to, if that's something that would work still with that connection.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
I think that's it.
We're good for community engagement. Then next would be research.
So I'll take that. So everyone in the committee reached out to at least 2 different local schools to inquire as how they're working with DEI. And seeing as it's a relatively new initiative for this area, it's interesting to hear like where the different schools are, and we found quite a variety, some things in common and some things that were very different. So we're looking to eventually create some kind of a Venn diagram, which would show which areas we have in common and which areas we don't, and what parts of the other ideas would we like to maybe look into or not at all. So that's a long-term plan. Before we get to that point, Nick Harris, school psychologist, was also on the committee with us, and he has access to many different school psychologists in the state. So he suggested pushing out a type of Google form to look at the different areas that we inquired with each school district. So some of the areas were things like, are there subcommittees? Is there a chair? Is there a website? What is the different plans that is being done for professional development for faculty? Is there a hiring committee role in DEI? All these different types of areas that could kind of be looking at as a comparative basis. So that is going to be pushed out to many, I think he gave us the number. It was somewhere in the hundreds, maybe thousands, like a huge number of school districts that, Tane, do you remember the number? It was very high. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it was 500, something like that, six in my head, of schools that he could access.
1,500 people.
Okay, so there you go, 1,500. So sorry. And then from there, we're going to have to narrow it down to which areas we, could really compare, because that is a huge number. It's going to be a huge undertaking just on an Excel spreadsheet to look at. But the idea being that once we can figure out what we want to do, where do we want to go from it, so that, it's not just performative, it's actually putting into action the stuff that we talk about. Like, how can we actually, once we figure out what things we find to prioritize, how do we actually put that into effect? And some of the things like Elizabeth's talking about are wonderful, because that's perfectly exactly what we
I can.
Thank you.
So our meeting was brief as well, and we did not have everyone there because everyone's obviously just crazy busy. A few things we discussed were the recent climate and how recent events of the blackface have been affecting the community at large. Kylie let us know about the climate of the middle school and how they're finding out their information, how they ended up finding out about information from the high school. And we discussed how important it is to make sure that we're communicating, because what students see on secondhand on social media, hear from their friends, is often not the full story, and often gives the wrong message about our school environment or what's really going on. And we also want some action items that we want to do are starting a Google form for students who can join our subcommittee or bring up conversations or topics that they think are important for us to address. And we're also working on recruiting some new members. Ms. Yeager mentioned that she had contacted a few middle schoolers who will be joining us for our next subcommittee meeting. So I'm really excited for that. And we're just working on getting more people, advertising our committee, and continuing to make sure that the student voice is heard.
Great. Thank you, Maxine. Can't think of anything else that we talked about. Mike? Oster?
So Maxine, to your point, I'm interested in working with you folks about how to clarify the social media truths and untruths about what's happening with our middle school community. Our students are hearing and seeing things that are on Snap or TikTok or whatever about what's happening at the high school. And I'd like to really, really figure out how to have a conversation with our student body in a proactive way before they get to the high school to say, listen, this is not the culture. This is not the climate that we're looking to promote. Maxine, you are one of the foundational members of the North Star sort of campaign, and you and I have had multiple conversations about how peer-to-peer conversations can make an impact, right? So how can our high school students help engage our middle school students in conversations that will affect their behavior as they leave the middle school? And I think that's a conversation that we need, student help with. So I'm excited. I'm excited to hear that the committee is interested in doing that stuff. So if you guys want to meet with me, let me know and I will find the time.
That sounds great. I know that another club at the high school, which is also called the Student
really trying to listen carefully to their faculty in order to think about strategies long term to turn around the kind of the climate and the culture in the high school right now around issues of race. So they started off their day with a large group discussion. They brought the faculty together and they talked through the facts of the situation that occurred. And Matt had outlined them for this group last time we were together, because there were lots of misconceptions, and people hear the story from many sources. So he was able to frame the issue as it unfolded, and then begin a conversation about, so how can we think about the climate and culture in the high school around issues of race. And they had a couple discussion questions that they broke into groups of 10 or 12 teachers, each with a facilitator to talk through. And the questions they were to address that day was to faculty, so what do you need to feel safe? And then what do you think students need to see and from the adults in order to feel safe? And then the third question was, so how do we engage the whole student body in conversations about improving the community for all? So the larger discussion happened first thing in the morning, and then the faculty broke into smaller groups, and they only got to the first question. Our faculty had so much to say about what they are seeing and feeling about just the general sense of feeling safe within the building. And if Mike Piscatelli were on this call, I'm sure he would report that it was a difficult day. He and his team heard a lot of emotion, a lot of blame, a lot of, this is just, we are not where we need to be. So they actually worked for a good portion of the day, didn't complete. So the following day was a faculty meeting day. So they met again on the Wednesday after the conference day, and spent that time, and as Mike Piscatelli would describe it, really turning a corner to, okay, we've aired what our feelings are and what we're observing. Let's talk about some solutions. So I know they generated a list of 8 or 10 action steps, and I think a smaller group met actually today to talk about what are some concrete steps we can take to try to improve the climate and culture of our building. And then, since that time, we've had other challenges that have been thrust upon us in the sense of another protest and, other issues that are there. So I guess my point here is the conference day was used to directly address kind of the not the incident, but really what it uncovered, the sort of latent or maybe not so latent feelings that many of our students have within the high school around the topics of race. So I give the high school a lot of credit to take advantage of the time that they had to wrestle with a real problem, and a real problem that needs a solution if we're going to have a safe place for students to learn. So that was a lot of the work on the conference day. The other DEI related work on that day, there were a couple things I'll mention. And one is that Matt did in collaboration with one of our high school assistant principals, Brian Mazza. He did a training at the high school for our clerical staff, our TAs, our monitors. It's called Training for Understanding. It's the same, or it was a variation of the training that was provided to all of our fall athletes that he talked about last time we were together. And then Mike Lester, I know he did a workshop at the middle school. I'm thinking Matt cloned himself that day because he was in multiple places over the course of 6 hours. But he also did a training for middle school staff, I understand as well.
Yeah, he was able to come down here in the afternoon, and we had about, there was at least 30 to 35 faculty members. He did a workshop called Equitable Classroom Cultures, and I attended it. It was great. The feedback from our teachers was pretty positive. So it was a nice day to again focus on some DEI work. So, and I
Thanks.
appreciate Matt coming down here after everything that he was juggling up at the high school for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, just I wanted to ask Marie. So it sounds like there were like the 3 questions that day, and the faculty only got through the first question, and then later you said they got to the making the action steps, like a different day, right? A different
Yeah.
situation.
Well, the very next day.
Oh, the next day at the okay.
That-
Did they ever get to the second question of what do students need for adults to do to keep them safe?
I think what they talked about, and I can't really answer directly now. They talked about how do we get that information from students. I can say that Mr. Piscatelli has been and is continuing to host small groups of students to come in and talk about their experiences. I think he's had at least 4 forums, with groups 4 or 5 kids at a time. And he intends to do them all school year long so that students who want to tell him and his team what's on their mind can, and do it in a safe setting, where there's ample time to speak and to be heard. So I know that will continue, but there is, he shared with me yesterday, the day before, another list of 8 or 9 ideas of ways to engage people, to problem solve, perhaps to bring in some outside experts to gain perspective. One of the things that I know he's heard over and over again, and our whole administrative team has heard, is that these things happen and no one does anything, because the doing is by definition kind of behind the scenes. I mean, we do investigations, and discipline does happen, but all of our administrators operate under federal laws that say we have to protect all children's privacy. So we're doing that because we're obligated to, and it is immensely unsatisfying to the people who are the victims or who are witness to things that are to them seem or may in fact be very wrong.
What you said about the day, Superintendent's Day being difficult, that reminds me of the way it was last night at the Board of Education meeting. It was also difficult and emotional, and there were a lot of sort of charged things that were, it was just a tense kind of a conversation, to say the least. And, it made me think that it would be good to have, I don't know if it's even remotely feasible, but to have a town hall style meeting similar to what happened last night, only with more notice and with an email blast and everything, really invite the whole community to come and talk about these disruptive incidents and what should happen, what could happen, what they feel. So there were about 10 students, 6 or 10 students there last night. Maybe more could come and talk about how they feel. And some of these ideas could be sort of pulled apart, so they're not all just jumbled up in a ball.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that would be great. It would be great to clear the air and to get more information, and that would be one way to get more information for sure.
Yes, I think the idea was well received by the board. The board members on the call, they can jump in. And we got a lot of things going right now, and that's certainly in the mix of if that's the best way to get people to provide their thoughts, and then also to engage in some productive discourse toward solutions. I think that would be a really productive way to go.
I'm sure you want to chime in, Mike Laster.
From a principal's perspective, there are legalities and regulations that we have to live by. And unfortunately, not everybody understands sort of those parameters. So increasing awareness is always something that is definitely something we should consider. But as Dr. Weil stated, people need to know that there are things that we can do and not do according to sort of the laws that we have to operate within, within. And everybody is available for due process. So I think that's something that everybody needs to consider.
As a school counselor, I frequently have that conversation with kids that you don't get to see what happened to the other kid. But I'm hopeful that some of these bigger things that we're doing will make it obvious that we are listening, creating more venues for conversations, having more really open conversations about race and about diversity and about gender and things that people feel like when somebody says this to me, nobody's doing anything. But here's us doing things. We're doing these other things that you don't get to know about, but here's us doing things that you do get to see. Maxine and then Elizabeth.
I know the feeling among a lot of the high school is administration isn't doing anything. So I understand that while we're talking about like events that involve specific students, we're not allowed to mention their names. But I think that something about what those guidelines are that you have to follow would really help students understand. I mean, this like 5-minute mention of it has really like made me understand why I feel as though sometimes things aren't happening. It's because everything is like behind the scenes. But I think that I'm seeing the benefits of what we're doing because I'm directly involved in it. But for students that are not, it's really difficult for them to see. For students who are just angry, sometimes like that anger just stops you from like looking further because you're just so upset, which is perfectly valid. And I think that like us communicating what we're doing, like just to like the outside. I know that Dr. Wells, you send like an email to like parents. Maybe if there's an email to students every once in a while or a way for someone to get on and just announce what's going on would be like a great step to make sure that students feel like something's being done, even if it's like behind the scenes or even if it's like the small steps, like we're working on it.
Thank you. I'm thinking like TV news announcement with one of the principals speaking might be really valid, like we do for any important announcement that everybody needs to hear. And it gives it that gravity. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the students last night who were talking, they weren't talking about like, the blackface incident or something like that. They were talking, the discussion came out of they were asking for more SROs in the district so that they can feel more safe. But so the question of SROs aside, it would be interesting to find out. There were a lot of things mentioned about not feeling safe in the cafeteria. One person seemed to be sort of conflating disruptive incidents with like protests, saying, oh, there's disruptive incidents in the hall, and then there's protests, and then all these terrible things happening as though protests are a disruptive incident. So that was a thread I felt that needs to be more pulled apart and discussed. And a kid was talking about, the teachers can't teach to the highest achieving kids because they're busy with, I don't know what, some sort of disruption, and there were a lot of things being said. So it just seemed like it wasn't about who's doing what to whom and sort of naming kids and discipline measures, but it was about the whole culture and atmosphere.
Thank you for clarifying. So that was all our DEI in action. Anyone want to add anything more to that before we go? I know we've got a lot to talk about with the equity audit. And I think that's you again, Marie. Are you doing equity audit?
Well, I'm going to start and you're going to help.
Oh, of course I'm going to help.
So the day after our conference day, we began the process of completing something called equity learning walks. Natalie McGee, who is with Progression Partners, was with us really all of that week and into the following week. She met, I should probably just take a step back. She spent about 45 minutes with all of our faculty and staff, giving everyone a little bit of insight into the work that we're doing with progression partners and with our equity teams. And that was just like a 30,000-foot overview. But on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Monday, she conducted with the equity teams these learning walks through each of our 7 buildings, which entail literally walking through the building and stopping and observing closely how our building feels, what's on the walls in the hallway, what greets you when you are in the lobby, what are our common learning spaces like, what are our classrooms like, what do you see on the walls, what evidence of student work do you see. So it's a data gathering experience, and all of the people who were on the walk had data gathering tools on what to look for. And the purpose of the walk really is to like hold a mirror up to each of our 7 buildings to say, when it comes to reflecting our students and the learning environment, how are we doing when it comes to the topic of equity and inclusion? And so she gathered all this data from the walk and the team members who were on it. And they are exhausting, by the way, the walks themselves. I was able to participate in the Westmere walk. She is now back at home writing 7 reports, for one for each of the 7 buildings that will be a summation of the qualitative data that was gathered on the walk, as well as the quantitative data that we're providing her through our Chief Information Officer, Mike Bastian. And these reports that she provides to us will become a building block for our action plans that will be written for each building. So they'll tell us, what do we need to work on? So it was a tremendous learning experience. And I think for the members of the team, it was really eye-opening and just a really good way to take a step back and look at yourself as a building with a new, fresh set of eyes. Christina, Ed, and I know Mike and others maybe have been on one of the walks, so I'll stop talking and let you guys fill in.
We did ours on Friday of that week. I ended up getting pulled into some student issues a lot, so I didn't get to walk, but I got to be part of the process. But I know, Mike, you were there for the walks. If you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, it was an excellent experience. We had a nice rubric that we walked around the building and looked at, things from a non-evaluative, non-judgmental sort of lens. And it was eye-opening to the point where I'll give one example that, was one common takeaway from the middle school team is that we have a lot of signage that's helpful for people to walk around our huge campus, provided you could read English. If you can't read English, it's a little difficult to navigate our huge campus because of our signage. So that was one, actionable item that we can act on. But there were other things that, as we went through the process with Natalie, she increased our awareness, which was awesome. I mean, she's been doing this in lots of different districts, different schools, different contexts. So her lens and her perspective is super important. And I appreciated it. We at FMS, we met as a equity team afterwards because there were certain people who weren't able to be involved with the walk. So we processed, the feedback that everybody, gave. And I'm interested in seeing what Natalie gives us back from her summary. So yeah, it was really cool.
Anyone have any questions about what happened so far with the equity audit and the walks? They really were kind of eye-opening. I didn't get to walk a lot, but I also did one through a breaking down bias training from the Anti-Defamation League that actually corresponded time-wise, and just looking and saying, like, do the posters I choose, do the books I have, what do kids feel welcome? Do they feel represented when they come into my office, when they come into this building? I think we could definitely do better. And then there was also from our walk, just some places where like the big white walkway hallway that we have that is just a blank, beautiful space that is blindingly white and very, very bright with sunlight. And how wonderful would that be as an opportunity for kids to put their stamp on something so that, you know, in 10 years when they come back, or I mean, I have parents of kids now who were alumni, some with me, to be able to say, like, I remember painting that mural. I remember putting my handprint there. So it was nice to see like opportunities as well as what we're doing well, as well as what we lack. I'm looking forward to hearing about it from the other buildings. Anything else about the equity audit currently? All right. I think that brings us to you, Jimsay, with the reading. This great book.
Yes, and I think it's a really nice segue from walking around in a building, in a school building space, and looking for diversity within that school building space, and what we had to read about in these next two chapters. But I wanted to start with chapter 3, which is really about establishing a blueprint. And there is specific questions on section 47, page 47, that I hoped that y'all would take a moment to reflect on for yourselves, because I'm a firm believer that you can't make this work cultural or institutional unless you make it personal. So I want for y'all to just take a moment and think about some of the questions that this author is asking us to reflect on in terms about intergenerational identities that we give our children. So I'm just going to read them out loud. So question 1 is, do you know where your mother grew up? Question 2 is, do you know where some of your grandparents met? 3 is, do you know the source of your name? Do you know which person in the family you act most like? 5, do you know the national background of your family, such as English, German, Russian, etc.? 6 is, do you know some awards that your parents received when they were young? And the last question is, do you know the names of the schools that your dad went to? And she mentions in the book that you can ask more questions than these, but I wanted to open it up to the group to hear about your experiences. How were you able to answer these questions? And what were some of your intergenerational identities after reading this chapter that you might have been surprised about? Christina?
I was going to call on myself. Thank you for calling on me. So I just think when I read these questions, do you know the source of your name resonates a lot with me. I ask almost every kid that comes in my office that question because I think it's fascinating. And it's so sad how few kids know the sources of their names. I was named after the dumb blonde on Three's Company, which is like not what I want to be able to tell people about my name, but my dad really liked the nickname Chrissy. And if you've seen Three's Company, and none of the kids have because it's really old, she's like the original dumb blonde. But her name is actually Christmas Snow. So I do appreciate my parents having some sense of, you know, don't kill me with my name, but Christina comes from Chrissy. And, you know, when I ask kids the story, some of them are able to tell me the stories of their names. And I love hearing about like whether it's a family name. I've had kids who are named by their older siblings. And these are the questions, if you don't ask them while you have the opportunity. I was just talking to a kid about this today. Like, I don't want to be a downer, but eventually your parents aren't going to be there to ask. So if you don't ask when you have the opportunity, like my grandparents are all dead, I'm not going to be able to ask them how they met. And maybe my parents would know those questions, but it's that kind of knowledge that once the opportunity is gone, you don't have that anymore.
Thank you so much. Rebecca?
So I actually found this chapter to be a little bit sad. I'll be honest with you. I didn't love this chapter. In my professional life, I see a lot of kids who are foster kids, and they frequently go through multiple foster homes. And as I read this chapter, I was thinking, like, those kids frequently don't have any sense of their family culture or their biological family, structure and traditions. And sometimes the traditions that they adopt change as well, depending on what home they're in. And so I was thinking, from an educational perspective, we're reading this book as part of this committee. What can we do better in schools to sort of address those kids that don't have that sense of family community? And I know the author did go into that a little bit in like the last page about talking about a new timeline. And I think that's great advice. But I think in reality, I'm sure in a lot of elementary school classrooms, kids are being asked, what are you going to do for Thanksgiving? And what does your mother make for Thanksgiving? And, I think through our lens, there's a lot of kids that don't have that. And so it just made me a little bit sad, I'll be honest with you.
No, and that's a great point and perspective, because to your point, the author does go into it a little bit, but it still feels like there's something missing, and there's more that we can do. But I think that from the perspective where this author is writing is truly from a family home perspective. And if we think about adopting this on a wider scale in a school building, then everything that you're mentioning is 100,000% so valid. How do we create traditions within our schools that make students feel valid within the school setting when they have these diverse and complex situations that they're coming from that might not necessarily come with these stories and the facility to kind of enter into their background and their how they got to where they are. That can be really, really tricky and requires a lot of trust, I think, between the student and the school setting or the adult that they're working with. Nina? Oh, yes, you're muted.
Right. Yep. Very similar. I have similar situations with my students. Some of the students that have, are not comfortable sharing about their families for personal reasons. And I really like there's that tie into their greater background of where they came from to, to kind of help them to see that, because I think there is such a sad, moment when kids feel that there's nothing that they can connect with, because that does unfortunately extend to them, to how they feel, their own sense of self-worth, even if they don't have that strong familial connection in general. So I really like how there could be a way to kind of bridge that for them. And then it makes almost like a living history for them and makes them able to connect to what things were before them, and to kind of see themselves in a greater way than not just like their immediate situation, which might be challenging. So I definitely think that that's definitely something that we as teachers could try to do, because I do have a lot of kids that are not proud of where they are right now.
Absolutely. Amy?
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of Rebecca's thoughts, because I had some very similar ones. And, me, myself, I'm, very close with my extended family. And this was, I could answer all these questions in a very meaningful and connected way. And I'm going to have to ask my kids, but I think they can answer quite a few of them as well. And that gives us as a family great meaning. But my son the other week was asked to do a project in 6th grade where he had to talk to a parent at home about like a food or something we do for a holiday. And it was a non-specific holiday, but it really brought to mind for me just this gap in understanding of our students' experiences. And while my son was able to write this really cool slideshow about matzo ball soup, I think it really, for some students, would really just highlight, however you want to call it, just the gap in lived experiences and connections that people have with their family. And there's such a variety of reasons for those lack of connections when they don't exist. And just that idea of making assumptions, like Rebecca said, like, oh, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? And, even something that sounds as innocent as, what are you doing over break, or what did you do over break? And, just to understand that everybody's home life is different. Some people are more proud or more, apt to share their home life than others. And when someone isn't, having to, not putting them in a classroom in a situation where they feel like they have to hide more of themselves, because a student who's, not happy about, their current situation in life probably already feels like they're crossing a border when they're walking into school anyways. And so, putting these things up front and center really makes them have to hide even more. So just as a goal to make students feel welcome and safe and that they belong in school, to ask them to hide as little of themselves, and not center that piece.
Christina? Oh, you're muted.
I clicked one button, but not the other one. I like all this conversation. What I've noticed in the last few years that a lot of teachers are a lot more careful about the asking of things like, what did you do over summer break? Because that can be a really charged question. How does your family celebrate the holidays? And that assumption of Christian-centric holiday celebrations. I think we have a lot further to go. And I think the more comfortable students are, being able to say like, actually, I don't do that actually, but teachers are being a lot more sensitive about not assuming that everyone's really excited for Christmas break or really excited for winter break or really excited for the spring break, because for some kids, they're like, not. They want to be in school. School is where they're happy and they have friends, and then they go home. And I think of a lot of the students I work with in the Alliance, the school is where they feel like they can be themselves, and then they go home and that's not where they feel they can be themselves. So I definitely feel like coming from teachers, there's a lot more cognizance of that disconnect that used to be very just like, of course, everybody loves summer break. Who doesn't love summer break?
Blanca and then Elizabeth.
I really appreciate that Nina and Amy and Christina brought that up, because that's what I was thinking about. And so sort of a tangible example of what can kind of go awry, I will offer a vignette here. My kids have been eating rice and beans since they were very young. And so they didn't like sandwiches. So I would send them to elementary school with rice and beans. And all three of them were made fun of, but nobody as much as my oldest child, who, when asked what her favorite Thanksgiving side dish was, said rice and beans, and they're kidney beans. And so they started calling her like kidney girl. Anyway, it started as a benign project in school, and then unfortunately sort of became a point of embarrassment for her, to the point where all three of them stopped taking rice and beans to school. So, and even though they're older now, they still sort of make sure I am, quote unquote, not giving them anything embarrassing in their lunch. So just sort of a vignette, an example of what can happen.
Elizabeth?
I can also imagine that for some kids, like a long break might mean that they are worried about whether they'll actually have enough food to eat throughout the whole break, or whether they'll run out of food. But I wonder, because the question of, so tell us about a holiday and a food you eat and stuff like that. Clearly it's an attempt to embrace diversity. Clearly it is an attempt to find, okay, this person has matzo ball history and this person has, whatever it might be. So it's well-meaning, I think, right? So when you look, like, it can start to seem like there's just landmines everywhere. Like, no matter what you ask these kids, there's going to be somebody that feels bad. So like, what's the answer? Because it seemed like a well-meaning question, but then it's going to have some problems. So what should people ask? What should teachers ask?
And I think that that's where it does get nuanced and pretty tricky. I will offer, though, that I think it's important to diversify how we allow students to respond to these questions. Maybe it's responding to these questions privately in essay format to a teacher. Maybe some students feel more comfortable sharing in the classroom and telling their stories in the classroom. Maybe it's more about being in tune to who is responding versus who's not responding in these types of settings. Maybe it's about asking before we ask these kinds of questions, what are your comfort levels with sharing information or stories about your family? So I think that there's ways to gauge comfort in what students are willing or not willing to share, because I agree with you, Elizabeth, that sometimes what ends up happening is in our want to make everything kind of flat, it becomes kind of lifeless and colorless and a little bit the opposite of what our intention is, which is to celebrate and empower. So I do think that, when you having an awareness of students that come from foster care, that these questions may be difficult or triggering for, understanding that prior to, facilitating this kind of discussion, so that way you can check in with a student prior to the discussion, what their comfort levels are. All of those things are preparing for having these conversations that can be difficult for some and enlightening and eye-opening for others. Because I will tell you that my own son, whenever he really wants to be Jewish, like he loves it. He wants to make matzo balls. And I told him, like, this year we're making matzo balls and latkes. Like he was like, no, like I want to make the latkes. I'm like, listen, we're gonna make them, I promise you. But that is not something that's, I grew up Christian, so did his dad. That's something that he's getting at school that he's super, super interested in. And I actually ended up having one of my very good friends who is Jewish. She's making him a Jewish care package and sending it to him with like stories in it of what her family does during this time of year. And I think there's ways to make inroads and connections if we use the same practices that we use in special education of individualizing for students by knowing what some of those potential landmines might be prior to having the conversation, and then curating those experiences so that students can share in multiple ways that they feel comfortable. So that way we can have a multi-pronged process and approach. Maxine, I saw other hands come up and then they left. So I hope that it wasn't because of me, but Maxine, I see your hand is still up.
Hearing that story about your child just like made me so happy. There's so much anti-Semitism in the world right now. And hearing a kid like so excited about like a culture that like I know me and Dr. Hralchik have at least is just like so heartwarming. I think that's the most like adorable thing ever. Latkes are really good. And I think that something that like I've thought about during this thing like is when teachers ask students like what you did over break, like some kids will just be like, I did nothing. Like I slept. I watched TikTok, and teachers will be like, that's it. That's all you did. There's no way you did nothing for a week. And sometimes that like hearing that, it's just like, this kid didn't say nothing because they wanted to tell you more. They said nothing because that's all they want to say right now. And sometimes taking nothing as an answer is okay. A lot of my teachers also do like Google Forms in the beginning of the year to ask about like ourselves, and something about what you said about like allowing kids to like share in different ways. Last year I had a teacher who on their participation rubric put listening as part of their participation rubric. And I thought that was really interesting. I didn't understand why listening was part of our participation rubric, because everyone's listening, but it makes the point of even if you're not speaking, you're still an active member of a conversation because you're taking in what other people have to say and like thinking to yourself. So I think that whole idea of like broadening what sharing means and like what being present in a classroom means is really important for students who share their ideas and information in different ways.
I absolutely love that. I think that that's really the goal, is for us to be innovative about how we look at these different settings. And obviously the author is really talking about a home setting, but in that next chapter she talks about bringing something that we have in the school setting into the home, which is the library, and a curated library, which I found really fascinating. Specifically page 64, where they gave some of the statistics on from the Cooperative Children's Book Center that releases the number of children's and young adult books by and about BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And of the 3,716 total books that were received from the US publishers in 2019, what was so fascinating was that 71% of them taken together, right, were books about white children, talking bears, trucks, monsters, potatoes, etc. So that was really, really eye-opening for me in thinking about things like equity audits, right? If we have 3,716 books, total books in the year 2019, and 71% of them are not representative of BIPOC children, then how do we as school districts then have the amount that we need, or a mass amount, right, of books that we can be bringing into our spaces that really push us and do what we're asking for educators to do, which is be and have libraries that are representative of their students. So like if the critical mass of numbers isn't even there in publishing, then that makes our jobs a lot harder, right? So what are some creative or innovative ways that we can really think about, well, if this is the numbers, and we're when we're doing these equity audits, and we're probably going to find gaps. Okay, well, we have to be ready for the fact that gaps might be there. What are some innovative ways that we can get around that? So I saw Elizabeth. I want to say Tane, right? No, Tayane. Tayani. You must forgive me because I know how that feels like, but Tayani, and I've met you many times, so I'm so sorry. But Elizabeth, Tayani, and then Nina.
And I'm going to take this opportunity to do, which I'm going to start doing this every time, is reminding everybody how to pronounce Tibisai's name. It's Tibisai. All right, and then I want, in this graph, she says that there's a main character that's either white or animal / other. I guess that was 71%, right? 71% of the time. And I liked a lot that in this chapter, she's really spelling out that she's not saying that, okay, we should get rid of all the books about white people or animals and just have Black people. No. It's not an either or. It's not a, if we have more books about Black characters, then our white children are going to feel bad because they're not going to be able to read books about white children. No. They're just going to read more books. All those classic books like, right, it's not pie. Classic books like whatever they might be, War and Peace, Moby Dick, Anne of Green Gables, whatever. Plus books by, Maya Angelou, or, books about two penguins, male penguins raising a baby. So they're going to read all that stuff. More and more stuff with more and more different characters. So the idea that it's not a zero-sum game seems really important to decide.
Absolutely.
So I feel like, I know at my school we do like the Scholastic book fairs, and I feel like with those coming in, I see a lot of like diverse books coming in. So at least like we're trying to get those in the hands of kids, which is a start for sure. Like they have all different kinds of characters and cultures within those, which I think is really awesome.
I think it's important though that she mentions in this chapter to be very careful that just because there might be books that have characters that are diverse, that it's also a diversity of mirrors or stories being told about those characters. So not just, you know, putting characters that might be Black, for example, that the only representation of that, and she mentions this, would be an inner city child that doesn't have a father and is being raised by a single mother. And all these tropes and stereotypes become a part of the narrative of the book, and are not real to the experience of, and she said specifically her children. So, you know, she does push us to look beyond just diversity by the numbers or diversity by the characters that we see on the page, but to really pre-read these books for what are the messaging that's happening, which I thought was compelling. Nina, and then Christina.
So absolutely, this spoke to me as well as a teacher, especially. So I had a student a few years ago. I was teaching the Industrial Revolution, and she asked me, "What about Madam C.J. Walker?" And I was totally just. I was like, how can I not bring up all of the other people that are left out of our textbooks? And because we have the internet as our main source of teaching these days, don't even use textbooks, right? I can now make charts where students can research African American men and women who were inventors and industrialists, and they've been completely left out of the picture. So I think for me as a teacher, luckily, I don't have to just rely on what's already made as a novel or a book, because I have access to so many other ways. And my students feel that when they can see themselves, right, in that, that of course, we take for granted that we can connect in certain ways to the history. But when you provide that for the students so that everybody can connect to it, and it is accessible, right? We don't have to necessarily order books for the library, which we should do, but it's also even easier because it is at our fingertips, right? And I am able to make hyperlinks into these charts now for the students when they can all view the variety of people who were there and have been silenced, so we can give them voice. So that completely spoke to me.
I think it's also important, and what I thought about having biracial children was books about white abolitionists and white civil rights leaders. Because I don't think that we give necessarily models of how do you do this when you're not a part of the community? How are you an advocate and an ally? What are the stories of advocacy and allyship that exists when you are, not part of a marginalized community, right? And how do those narratives then inspire, children? Because I've heard from so many different people, like, I don't want my child to feel bad for what people in generations past did, because that's not who we are. And in my thought process, it was like, well, there were a lot of great people that were also helping to ensure that these movements move forward, and a balanced approach, I think, is really, really necessary. So that way that there's also models and heroes whose names might not be, and again, I don't think it's a either or, right? I think we can know about, Black and white folks that came together to walk across the bridge in Selma and tell those stories in meaningful ways. And I think that that's where we lack some of the nuance, maybe. Christina.
Thank you. I want to give major props to our library folks at Farnsworth Middle School. They do an amazing job of having resources for kids to see representation of, like, anybody who's in our building can find books, and not just one. Because, I remember going to school and there'd be like one book. I was shocked that with this statistics, 3% of books that represent the LGBTQ, et cetera, population, because Maura puts together an amazing book talk for the Alliance every year. And I feel like every time I'm floored by how many books we have in our library to represent. And they're books of quality. They're books where the characters, it's not just like, great, there's a gay character. Oh my gosh, they're talking about their gay life and this is their gay story. It's like they're having full lives, full stories. So I understand, like, yeah, you don't want just to be a character that's in the typical trope of a Black child's existence. You want them to be fully seen as a whole child doing all the things and having a full life. And it's not just about, so I was really surprised because if that's 3% of that number, that's like only 100 or so books. And I feel like every year I'm seeing so many more. So maybe the statistic has gotten a little better in the last couple of years. And maybe it's also that the good quality books that we're getting in, because this statistic doesn't speak to the quality of those books. That there's actually some I remember reading a study once about why there's so many books about animals, because girls will read books about boys and boys will read books about boys and girls will read books about girls and boys will not. So if the main character is female, you're less likely to engage a young male reader. So that's why a lot of times those books will have animals as characters, because everyone can relate to an animal and it doesn't drive away half of the potential readers of that book. And I remember reading that and being like, maybe we need to work on encouraging boys to be willing to read books about girl main characters instead of just writing them about bunnies.
Christina, I was
crazy.
just thinking like, oh, the patriarchy. I digress. Amy.
No, you don't digress at all.
No, I was just, I just wanted to add it, like, not just in the books we have in our library, but about more of what Nina was talking about in the curriculum and the pieces that we add to do a completing the narrative. And I think that that can be done in any content. And what a great curriculum development and professional learning experience that is for teachers, and that can be K-12. Really taking a look at the work that you're doing, taking a look at the content that you're working with students on, and how can I give a more 360-degree view of this content so that our students really understand all the entry points. And not only are we giving them all of these entry points, but we are teaching them about themselves and seeing themselves represented in the content, and showing our students everyone represented in that content.
So for the last piece of today and this learning component, I wanted to kind of share this book that I found for my children that has to do with Dominican Republic, and it's called Island Born. And it's a really beautiful book because it talks about a really difficult topic in Dominican Republic history, which is the dictatorship of Trujillo, who was a very, very just destructive figure on the island, and a lot of the reason why a lot of people immigrated from the island. And the way that they do it is in such a developmentally appropriate way, where they don't talk necessarily about the dictatorship, but they talk about it almost in the sense of, not almost, they talk about it as a monster that really was up on the island and was destroying things. And when the main character, who's a little brown girl, asks, how did they destroy the monster? One of the characters says, the way that all monsters are destroyed, caring people came together and they stood up against injustice, and they made it so that folks could have a better life on the island. And if they couldn't, that they at least could go somewhere that they could have a better life. And I just want to pose a challenge to our DEI committee, and as an educator, give y'all a little bit of homework. But is there a book that you think is really representative of this chapter? And if you wouldn't mind emailing that title to me, and we can start our own little DEI books that share our cultures and our communities here in the DEI community, and put it out to our community members. And this could be just a really great way for us to personalize our experiences that we're having here together, and just put a little book list together from our DEI committee to your curated book, home book list that parents can have in their homes. And if you sent me the name of the book that you want to have on this book list, I'll look for it. I'll put what age group it's for, all that good stuff. Just give me the name and the title of it. And I can put next to it like recommended by DEI committee member Katie, or Nina Kaplan or Rebecca, like who it was recommended by. And we can start helping our parents in our school district curate their own home libraries with recommendations from our cultures and books that are important to us and that give windows into the souls of our communities and our culture. So I hope that that's not a hard lift for folks, just one book. And if you email it to me, or I didn't tell Matt that I was doing this. But yes, we can share it as part of the DEI library visits. And that's when folks go to the library, maybe they can check out, hopefully some of these books are there, and they can check out some of these great recommendations from your handy dandy DEI school district committee. So like I said, if you send me these books, I'll put together this list. And I just wanted to say thank you to our steering committee for allowing me to do this learning component tonight. And I really appreciate everybody's input, and I'm excited to see how we continue to grow. So without further ado, I'll do the Oprah thing.
Hey,
Back to you, Christina.
I got a question though, Tibisai.
Yes, Elizabeth.
Should we make it that if people want to, they could put a sentence or two or whatever about why this book is great, why, and then so there could be, the list could be varied. Some could just be a title with age group. Some could have the response from the person about,
I mean, if you give me more information, Elizabeth, I won't hate it. Home library list from your handy dandy DEI committee, which I will forever call it. Now that I said it out loud, I will forever call us the handy dandy DEI committee. So apologies in advance. Do we have a deadline before the next DEI committee meeting? If you can have those to me, so that way I can put together the list, we can put it out into the world, and it'll be a great way for folks to pick up holiday gifts for family members or friends or whomever in your life you feel might want to peek into a different culture or identity. Maxine is asking not me questions. Is it me, Maxine?
Yeah, I know Miss Thomas put this in the chat, but where would we find your email so we can email this to you?
I'll put my email in the chat, and I know this is, well, no, I'm going to the listserv. I know there's two for me. You can use either or, because if I put it here, there might be messages that I don't want to. Yes.
Any other questions you sent the We Read Too as a link for families who are interested in books that, feature stories and characters of people of color, which I appreciate. I think that's a great resource. So it's 8:28. Do we have any last orders, or does somebody want to make a motion to conclude this meeting? I see Nina. Would someone like to second that? I see lots of people, but I'm gonna call Maxine because she's in the corner. So our next meeting is December 20th. I look forward to seeing all of your faces there. Thank you so much.
Great job, Christina. Great job, Tibisai. Thank you for taking leadership roles tonight.
Have a good
Voluntold.
night.
Thank you for trusting us.
100%.
Good night.
Soon.
night.
Have a good night.